In Portland, where peace seemed everlasting and appearances rarely told the whole truth, reputation was a currency more precious than gold, and no one guarded hers more fiercely than Miss Laverne. Jermaine was the only son of Miss Laverne, a wealthy returnee who owned one of the largest Airbnb empires in Portland. Life had always smiled on them. Their mansion at Somerset Falls rose proudly on the hillside, like a palace carved into stone. Miss Laverne was a sharp woman with a keen eye for deception. Neither wealth nor beauty could conceal true character from her. She had built her success on strength and wisdom, and nothing frightened her more than the idea of Jermaine marrying an unworthy woman. She had seen marriages crumble under the weight of infidelity and fading commitment. She had lived through one herself. The scars of that past made her determined to spare her son the pain she once endured. One quiet Sunday afternoon, while she was cooking, Jermaine stepped into the kitchen. "Mum, I have someone to show you," he said softly, holding out his phone. On the screen was a young woman, light-skinned and curvaceous, dressed elegantly in a blue summer designer dress. She posed with quiet confidence, her smile both graceful and assured. There was something in her smile, a softness that could have been kindness or calculation. Miss Laverne, seasoned by life, could never take beauty at face value. Miss Laverne studied the photo and smiled faintly. "Son," she said slowly, "this girl is beautiful, but looks can be deceiving." Jermaine chuckled, setting his phone on the counter. "She's my girlfriend," he said. "Girlfriend," Miss Laverne repeated. "Another one? I have yet to hear you speak of a wife." Jermaine smiled. "We've been dating for a few months now. She's a tutor at the College of Agriculture, Science and Technology. She lives in a rented house at Norwich Heights. Mum, she's the one I want to marry. I'm in love with her." Miss Laverne sat on the high stool and leaned back. "That's a splendid thing, my son, but love can blind a man into marrying the wrong woman. An unvirtuous wife will never bring you peace. She will bring misery into your life. A bad woman can never make a happy home." Jermaine smiled again. "Melissa is a good woman," he said, "and she loves me." The old tigress nodded slowly. "Then let me see how deep her love truly is, and how strong her moral character can be. I want to know how loving and caring she really is." "What do you mean?" Jermaine asked curiously. Miss Laverne smiled gently. "Your father called this morning. He said he needs you to come to England to care for him after his eye surgery. You know that eye problem runs on your father's side of the family. Before you go, I want you to introduce me to Melissa as a blind woman. Tell her I am a friend of yours who needs someone to care for me while you're away. She must never know I'm your mother. I want to see her true character paint 1,000 words more beautiful than her picture." Jermaine laughed. "Mom, that's too much. You don't have to test her." But Miss Laverne's face turned serious. "I want to see if she can care for the sick and disabled the same way she would for the strong and healthy. Fakeness can hide in plain sight, but true character is only revealed through trials. It is my duty to protect my child. Let me do this one last thing before you fully step into manhood." Jermaine reluctantly agreed. The days that followed were heavy with thought. Miss Laverne had never met Melissa, yet the girl stayed on her mind. Who was she really? What lived behind that pretty smile? There was only one way to find out. Within a few weeks, Miss Laverne had transformed herself into a blind old woman. She dressed in worn clothes, dark sunglasses, and carried a walking stick. Jermaine introduced her to Melissa, and soon the day came for him to leave for London to care for his father. The house his mother had built stood quietly in a tranquil neighborhood. It was modern and luxurious, painted a clean white. The garden was alive with bright flowers, and on the veranda sat the blind old woman, Miss Laverne in disguise. She wore a faded floral dress, dark glasses, and held her walking stick. The morning sun glinted off her lenses like small mirrors of light. When Jermaine stepped out that morning with his luggage, Melissa wrapped her arms tightly around him. "I am going to miss you," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "Don't, babes," he said softly. "I will only be gone for a few months. Stay here and take care of my auntie for me. She is my mother's closest friend. I I trust you will care for her as you would care for me. Melissa did not reply. She acted as though she were too lost in the emotion of his departure to speak. Everything you need is here for your comfort, Jermaine continued. With Melissa still holding the tail of his shirt, Jermaine stepped closer to Miss Laverne. Auntie, he said, I am leaving now. Melissa, my girlfriend, will take care of you while I am gone. Do not worry, Miss Laverne said calmly. I am sure you are leaving me in good hands. Melissa glanced at the old blind woman sitting quietly in the morning sun. Jermaine, can't you get someone else to look after her? She asked in a low voice. Jermaine's smile faded slightly. She is very dear to me, he said. I want someone to take care of her as they would care for my mother. Are you not willing and able to do that? Melissa nodded. All right, I will do it for you and for your mother's sake. Miss Laverne watched as the young lovers hugged and kissed before Jermaine stepped into the taxi. She stood quietly on the veranda, listening as the car rolled away and disappeared down the road. For the first few days, Melissa appeared to be a devoted carer. She cooked, washed, and guided the blind lady with every step she took. She greeted Miss Laverne politely and even offered to help her bathe or eat. It was almost too perfect. Her smiles were swift, her gestures careful, her tone sugary. Miss Laverne had learned long ago that sweetness could be a mask. Behind her dark glasses, Miss Laverne watched closely. She studied Melissa's habits, her tone, and her manner. It did not take long for things to change. The shift began subtly, a sigh here, a delayed response there, a small frown when she thought the blind woman couldn't see. Then the mask started to slip. Before long, Melissa began serving meals irregularly and spent long hours on the phone. The house became untidy, with dirty dishes piling up in the sink. Melissa grew careless and lazy. She no longer spoke kindly to Miss Laverne, treating her as though she were invisible. When she cooked, she slapped the food onto the plate and shoved it towards her as if feeding a dog. Within 2 weeks, she ceased cooking altogether. Melissa began buying takeaway food most days. She would eat first and serve Miss Laverne what was left. Miss Laverne watched in silence and listened carefully. When Melissa spoke to her female friends, she shouted and laughed loudly. But on certain calls, her voice softened and she giggled in a way that stirred Miss Laverne's suspicion. Most of the time, Melissa walked past her without a word. Even when Miss Laverne called out, she acted as if she hadn't heard. The old woman noticed everything, from the scorn in her tone to the coldness in her manner. The more she watched, the clearer Melissa's true nature became. One late evening, as Melissa stepped out, her heels clicked loudly against the marble floor. Miss Laverne listened to the sound and pictured her swaying her hips in a short dress. Melissa, are you going out? Miss Laverne asked gently. It is late and it is election time. The fanatic supporters around here can be dangerous. I hope you are not wearing orange or green, she added playfully. Melissa turned sharply. Blind old woman, mind your own business. I go out as late as I want and wear any color I please. The words struck with a sharpness no blade could match, carried not only by cruelty, but by the cold delight behind them, a rising wind that warned of a coming hurricane. Her tone gathered force like a storm. Miss Laverne's concerns were swept aside as easily as a tree in high winds, shaken for a moment, yet never uprooted. The gust of Melissa's words rattled her, but the foundation of her purpose held firm. 2 days later, Melissa returned home with a man driving Jermaine's car. Silently, the two walked past Miss Laverne and went upstairs. That night, she listened from the corridor as they made love in Jermaine's room. For a moment, she stood outside the door, her heart heavy. So this is the woman my son wants to marry, she thought. The next morning, Melissa smiled sweetly as she made breakfast for the man. Miss Laverne sat on the veranda in the golden sunlight, her thoughts quiet but firm. I may be pretending to be blind, she mused, but my son is the one truly blinded by the love of a pretty face and a bad heart. Moments later, Melissa stepped outside, still dressed in her lingerie, holding a plate. Auntie, she called softly, her voice smooth, as if offering peace. Here is some breakfast. I boiled the green bananas extra soft for you. Miss Laverne accepted the plate silently, knowing it was nothing more than leftovers. She looked down at the food and saw bits of mashed banana, a few strands of callaloo, and specks of salted fish. The meal looked as though it had been scraped from another plate onto a dirty one. "Thank you," she said quietly. Melissa smiled faintly, unaware that she was serving the owner of the house as if she were an unwelcome guest. 2 months had passed since Jermaine had left. The house that once felt like a home of warmth, respect, and care had slowly turned into a place of neglect, betrayal, and cruelty. Miss Lavin, once comforted and respected, now endured mistreatment and disregard. Each morning, the old woman in disguise would sit on the veranda beneath the morning sun. She often waited for Melissa to go out before quickly preparing a small meal for herself or watering her flowers. The yard had grown unkempt, littered with dry leaves, and Melissa had not swept it once. At noon one Sunday, Melissa walked out to the veranda, wearing a revealing beach outfit, sunglasses, and carrying a picnic basket. Jermaine's car keys dangled from her finger. "Auntie," she shouted, her tone sharp and mocking. "You're a freeloader. You sit around here all day doing nothing and still expect to be fed." Miss Lavin swallowed hard. "Can't you see I am blind?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I can see," Melissa spat. "Something I know you wish you could do, blindy." "Blindy," Miss Lavin repeated softly, as though tasting the insult on her tongue. As Melissa walked away, Miss Lavin decided to push further to see how far she would go. "I wasn't born this way," she said gently. "I could see until only a few years ago. I lost my sight with age, something you are far from reaching. Illness does not discriminate. It can befall anyone at any time. No one is exempt." The words stopped Melissa in her tracks, as if they carried a curse. "You may be able to see," Miss Lavin continued, "but like many people, your pride may blind you to reality." Melissa turned sharply, fury flashing in her eyes. "Watch your mouth, blindy," she hissed. "I might just teach you a lesson for talking too much." "Life has already taught me enough harsh lessons," Miss Lavin replied calmly. "I doubt there is anything left you can teach me. You can huff and puff, but you cannot blow me away." In a storm of anger, Melissa marched to the car and packed away her basket. In a flash, she returned to the veranda, grabbing the old woman by the arm. "The yard needs sweeping," she scoffed, "and you are going to sweep it." With heavy steps, she dragged the blind woman off the veranda and shoved a rake into her hands. "I am going out," she barked. "When I get back, I want to see this yard swept. Blind or not, do it properly. Do you hear me?" Miss Laverne's hands trembled slightly as she held the rake. "Yes, Melissa," she said softly, and began to pull the rake across the yard. Dust rose like smoke around her feet. That evening, Melissa's friends came over. Their laughter filled the air as they mocked her. "Girls, come and see how the old blind woman swept the yard clean," Melissa laughed. "She didn't miss a spot," another jeered. "Are you sure she's blind?" one added. Miss Lavin sat quietly in her room, listening to their cruel laughter. Her heart was heavy with sadness and disbelief. "My son is in love with her," she thought. "If this is how she treats an old blind woman, how would she treat my son as her husband?" A home, she thought, was built on character, a marriage on virtue, and this woman possessed neither. The thought deepened her sorrow. The next morning, and in the days that followed, the abuse and neglect only worsened. Each evening, Melissa returned later and later. Sometimes midnight would pass, and she would not come home to prepare dinner for Miss Laverne. Most of the time, she would return with half-eaten takeaway and hand it to her. Miss Laverne never ate any of it. She would quietly dispose of it and prepare a small meal for herself whenever Melissa was away. Sometimes, Melissa returned with bags full of designer shoes, perfumes, and dresses, the same man following her silently into the house. Often, they sat comfortably on the living room couch, pouring glasses of wine from Miss Laverne's collection. She watched them in disgust, particularly seeing the man drink her expensive wine and stroll through her home in her son's dressing gown. One evening, they sat on the couch, the man shirtless and Melissa partially undressed. The man laughed aloud by accident. Miss Laverne, stumbling into the living room, spoke up. "I heard a man laughing. Has Jermaine come back?" Melissa turned sharply. "It was the man on the TV," she barked. "Old foolish woman, blindy, go back to your room." "Sorry," Miss Laverne whispered, turning and stumbling to her room. A woman whose name had once commanded respect was now vilified and dismissed as if she were a dog. Her heart sank deeper into sorrow. That night, she could not sleep. She sat up in bed, whispering to herself, "My son will be shocked and heartbroken when he learns the truth. But he must know she is a girlfriend, for sure, not a wife. He can never marry this girl. A woman who lies, cheats, neglects, and abuses the old and vulnerable will never love or care for a real man." One cool evening, the night alive with the sound of toads and insects, a soft wind blew outside. Inside, Miss Laverne lay half asleep in bed when she heard a car engine approaching. Headlights flashed through the window. She peeked through the curtain. Melissa stepped out, but she was not alone. A different man, tall and muscular, emerged from the driver's side. Miss Laverne watched as the man wrapped his arm around her waist, and they walked toward the house. Miss Laverne stood in shock and disbelief. "One man is bad enough, but two," she whispered painfully. "I cannot watch this anymore." She reached into her drawer and retrieved her phone, the first time she had used it since going undercover. She switched it on and called Jermaine. "Hello, Mum," he greeted warmly. "How are you?" "I am okay, son," she replied. "And how about you and your dad?" "I am fine, thanks," he said. "Dad's surgery was a success and he has fully recovered." "Good to hear," she said. "I am so happy you called," he exclaimed. "I cannot seem to reach Melissa these days. I have been trying to contact her for the last couple of hours. Her line is off and she hasn't replied to my messages. Can you please check if she's okay? I am worried." Miss Laverne's heart tightened. She looked up, picturing Melissa upstairs in her son's bed with another man. She swallowed hard before replying. "She is here, Jermaine. I saw her earlier." She looked up again and sighed. "I know that sigh," he said. "Mom, something is wrong, isn't it?" "Son," she said calmly, "when are you coming home?" "I wanted to surprise you both," he said, "but since you asked, I am coming tomorrow." "I will not say anything to her," she replied. "She will be surprised to see you." Miss Laverne put the phone down slowly and leaned back in her bed, the weight of the situation heavy on her chest. Meanwhile, Jermaine sat on the sofa beside his father, but his mind was elsewhere. In his hand was an open jewel box. He stared at the stunning engagement ring inside, thoughts of the wedding weighing heavily on him. And yet, he smiled confidently. His father glanced at him. "Son," he said, "I can see that you love this girl. I can only hope she loves you the same. I took for granted your mother's deep love for me. For years, she endured my infidelity and my abuses. I was young and foolish. I did not realize how rare and precious a virtuous woman is. Indeed, you never know you have a good thing until it is gone." He paused then, looking away as if searching for the man he once was. A quiet sigh left him, heavy with regret, the kind that settles in the mind and never truly leaves. "After trying everything," he said quietly, "your mother divorced me and returned to Jamaica. I was angry then, but I have learned from my mistakes. They are painful reminders. We men can be naive, easily blinded by beauty and charm, trying to turn unworthy women into wives. Yet when we have a virtuous woman, we often fail to treat her the way she deserves. These are some of the most regrettable mistakes men make." He placed his hand firmly on his son's shoulder. "Son," he warned, "be careful not to make any of those mistakes." Jermaine nodded and glanced at the ring, closing the jewelry box. For Miss Laverne, the night felt heavier than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as Miss Laverne whispered, "I know it will break his heart, but hopefully he will come see for himself." The next morning, Melissa stepped out, her heels clicking against the tiles. She wore a short dress and dark sunglasses. The same man from the previous night wrapped his arm around her, and she smiled confidently as he held her waist. As the car drove out of sight, Miss Laverne stood on the veranda, the morning sun glinting off her sunglasses in her hand. "I hope you bring him back here tonight," she whispered under her breath. Hours passed. Miss Laverne's thoughts raced. She had seen enough to know the truth, but she hoped her son would witness it for himself. The woman he wanted to marry was not who she pretended to be. She was a woman of false charm. Miss Laverne sat quietly, her mind restless, waiting. Suddenly, the low hum of a car engine reached her ears. Melissa had returned, and she was not alone. As Miss Laverne had hoped, Melissa was with the same man. They walked past her quietly and strolled into the house as if they owned it. Miss Laven's hands trembled on her walking stick. Her thoughts raced, but then she saw Jermaine walking up the driveway, quietly and deliberately. Relief and fear filled her heart at the sight. As he reached the veranda, she hugged him softly and whispered, "She is upstairs." He stepped inside quietly and went upstairs, his mind racing and his heart pounding. He kept one hand in his trouser pocket around the jewel box, as if he could stop it from rattling. The bedroom door stood a little ajar. He pushed it open and froze. On his bed, his girlfriend straddled a man, the sheets twisted beneath them, sweat shining on her back. Her face was a map of abandon. She rode with fierce passion, caught up in the ecstasy of the movement. Shock tore through Jermaine. Heat followed it, a raw, bitter anger that made his vision narrow and his voice thin with pain. He did not think. He exploded. "Melissa," he screamed, "you in my bed with another man?" Melissa whipped her head around. For an instant, her eyes went wide with fear. She scrambled off the man and wrapped a sheet around herself. The man fumbled blindly, trying to cover himself with a pillow and to find his trousers. "Who is he?" the man demanded, each word like a strike. Melissa did not speak at first. She stepped back and whispered, "Jermaine, I can explain." Jermaine's breath came hard and fast. The world around him blurred, grief mixed with fury in a way that unmoored his judgment. His eyes hardened until they were cold. "The only explanation you are going to get is from my machete," he snarled. "You are dead." Her scream split the room. "Please, Jermaine," she cried, but he strode out of the room like a storm. The man bolted for the door and nearly knocked over a lamp as he scrambled to dress. Melissa pulled herself together and tried to follow. Panic and calculation mixed on her face. Downstairs, Miss Laven heard the crash of furniture and ran toward the noise, her heart pounding. Jermaine's footsteps thundered up the stairs, his voice filled with fury. She saw him disappear around the corner, the glint of steel in his hand. "Jermaine," she cried, pushing her legs to move faster than they had in years. But Jermaine was too fast for her. When he got to the door, it was locked. Inside, the man stood bracing it with all his weight, panting in fear. Jermaine twisted the handle furiously, the wood rattling under his grip. "Open this door," he shouted, his voice raw with rage. He slammed his shoulder once, twice. The frame groaned. Then he stepped back, raised his foot, and with one thunderous kick, the door cracked open, splinters flying as the man stumbled backwards in terror. Melissa dove under the bed, screaming. The man tried to follow, scrambling on all fours, but Jermaine caught him mid-motion. With a roar, he brought the flat of the machete down hard across the man's back. The sound cracked through the room again and again. The man howled in pain, twisting and crawling, but Jermaine's fury only grew. He struck him once more, each blow landing with the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. "Please don't kill me," the man screamed, his voice cracking with terror as he crawled backwards. His hands trembled, searching for mercy that did not exist in Jermaine's blazing eyes. Jermaine struck him a few more times, each blow landing with brutal force, before Miss Laven grabbed him from behind, crying out his name. With one swift motion, Jermaine tore free from her grip. Fury surged through him like fire. In one explosive move, he flipped the bed aside, the machete raised high above his head, his face twisted with rage. "Jermaine, no!" Melissa screamed with eyes wide with dread. Miss Laven hurled herself at him, clutching his wrist with both hands as the machete hovered inches from striking. They tumbled hard to the floor, the blade clattering between them. Jermaine struggled to pull free, his breath ragged with fury, while she clung to him with desperate strength, her voice trembling as she cried, "Please, my son, don't do this." Without hesitation, the man scrambled to his feet and ran for the door. He burst out into the night, vanishing into the darkness. Miss Laven held Jermaine in firm, determined restraint. "No, son," she begged, holding him tightly. "Please, stop." He twisted in her grip, chest heaving, eyes blazing with fury. "She cheated on me," he gasped. "In my own house. How could she do this?" "Listen to me," Miss Laven said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. She would not let him go. "I have seen everything. I know who she is. She is a woman of lies and an insatiable desire for pleasure, not a woman of care and constancy." Jermaine's rage faltered at her words. For a moment, the machete was forgotten between them as pain and confusion battled with the anger in his eyes. Miss Laven held him firmly, drawing on the strength of a mother and the authority of truth. "Look at your hands," she said softly. "What will you be remembered for? A life taken in a single moment, or a life rebuilt with your head held high?" He stared at his own shaking hands. The jewel box in his pocket felt impossibly heavy, the weight of the ring and the gravity of the choice pressing down on him. Melissa's shrill pleas and Jermaine's hurried curses filled the room. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the agony only a mother knows, the pain of seeing her child in danger of becoming someone he was not. Miss Laverne tightened her grip just enough to steady him. "Let her go," she said, not as a plea, but as a verdict. "If you spill blood tonight, you will lose more than you have already lost." A long, awful silence filled the room. Jermaine's breath hitched. Slowly, he lowered the machete, letting it fall to the floor with a dull thud. Tears broke free, running down his face. From the corner of the room, Melissa's face was pale with guilt and terror. For a moment, Jermaine began to calm, his shoulders sagging as the adrenaline ebbed. Then his eyes fell on Melissa's discarded clothing on the floor, a stark reminder of the betrayal he had just witnessed. Rage surged through him again. He lurched forward, fists clenched, ready to strike. Miss Laverne stepped forward immediately, planting herself firmly in front of him. She grabbed his arms and held him tightly, her eyes locking onto his with fierce authority. "No, my son," she said firmly. "Not tonight. I will not let you throw away your future for an unworthy woman." Jermaine struggled against her grip, his breath coming in sharp, angry bursts. "But Mom, how could she? How could she?" "I have seen her true colors," Miss Laverne interrupted, her voice unyielding. "Every lie, every deceit, every betrayal. This is who she is. She is not wife material. She is a woman who needs more than one man to satisfy her, and who takes advantage of the vulnerable without remorse. Let your anger be your teacher, not your weapon." Melissa tried to hold the posture of innocence and failed. She could not meet Miss Laverne's eyes. Miss Laverne rose like a pillar, her voice quiet but absolute. "You wanted him to be blinded by love, so you could have it all your way," she said to Melissa. "You wanted him to give you a name and a ring, not knowing that you chose to make him just another man in your life." Jermaine looked down at her, hollow and raw. The jewel box in his pocket suddenly felt meaningless. He covered his face with his hands and wept, the sound old as grief and sharp as new pain. His chest heaved, and his eyes darted between his mother and Melissa, who looked uneasy. Miss Laverne held him firmly. "Control your emotions, Jermaine. Let her see that virtue outlasts lust and deception. This is the lesson she cannot teach, but I can." Slowly, his thoughts abandoned the machete, fury giving way to pain. Miss Laverne guided him to sit, her presence a steady anchor. Melissa sobbed in the corner. Her shame was undeniable. Miss Laverne removed her sunglasses, eyes sharp and piercing. "Melissa," she said calmly, "now you know who I am, not blind Dee. I have seen your true character. You lie, indulge in licentiousness, and disregard the vulnerable, the less fortunate. You are not wife material. You are not worthy of my son." Jermaine's chest heaved, his hands clenched, but his rage now sharpened into clarity. "Leave," he said, voice shaking. Melissa fled, her shadow trailing behind her like the weight of her shame. The door slammed, leaving silence heavy but cleansing. For the first time since she entered their lives, Melissa looked small. Her charm and her confidence were gone, leaving only the truth she had tried so hard to hide. Miss Laverne wrapped her arms around her son. "Jermaine, you can never turn a whore into a housewife." The next morning, the house felt lighter. Jermaine sat with Miss Laverne on the veranda, the sun warming their faces. "Thank you, Mum," he said softly, "for everything. Scars heal, but lessons remain, and some lessons, Jermaine thought, are worth the pain that brought them." "You've learned a valuable lesson," she replied calmly. "Only true love brings respect, care, and peace of mind. Never settle for less." Jermaine leaned into her embrace, no longer blinded by pain but guided by clarity. He exhaled slowly, the weight lifting from his chest. The world felt different now, not broken, but clearer. Some storms destroy, others reveal the strength that survives. If you enjoyed the story, show some love. Like, comment, and subscribe to Words, Sound, and Story, where Troy Mackenzie transforms real-life experiences into meaningful, dramatic, and entertaining tales. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Bless up.